At first listen, this song feels almost effortless. The melody flows, the chorus lifts. Everything sounds natural, like it simply existed, and Freddie Mercury just stepped in front of a microphone to let it out. But Brian May once said something that completely reframes how you hear it. He called it so difficult to write. Not difficult in a technical, academic sense. Difficult in a way that quietly drains you. Difficult in a way that hides its complexity so well that most people never suspect what's underneath. That's what makes this song dangerous. Because the hardest music doesn't announce itself as hard. It disguises itself as simple, honest, almost casual. When Queen started working on this track, there was no guarantee it would even work. It didn't follow normal pop rules. It didn't sound like rock radio. And emotionally, it asked Freddie to stand completely exposed in front of the listener. What sounds joyful is actually restless. What sounds powerful is deeply uncertain. And what feels uplifting is built on vulnerability. Brian would later admit that the song demanded more precision, more discipline, and more emotional honesty than almost anything else Queen ever recorded. To understand why he eventually called it a modern classic, you have to go back to the obsession that started it all and the place Freddie was reaching toward when he wrote it. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Freddie Mercury and Queen and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel, like, and share. Freddie Mercury wasn't just listening to rock music when he began writing this song. He was listening to gospel. Not casually, intensely. He was fascinated by the emotional power of gospel choirs, by the way voices layered together could sound both communal and painfully personal at the same time. Gospel didn't hide its longing, it embraced it. Every note reached outward, asking for connection, for meaning, for relief. That spoke directly to Freddie. He didn't want irony, he didn't want distance, he wanted sincerity, even if it made people uncomfortable. The idea behind the song wasn't to write a hit, it was to write something that felt like a plea. Something that sounded like a celebration, but functioned like a confession. That's why the structure began to drift away from anything Queen had done before. Instead of verses that calmly led to a chorus, Freddie built emotional waves. The song rises, collapses, rises again, never quite settling. From the beginning, it was ambitious. Too ambitious, some might say. Rock bands didn't write gospel-inspired pop songs with massive vocal arrangements, and they certainly didn't do it without a real choir. But Freddie wasn't interested in limitations. He was interested in effect. He wanted the song to feel bigger than one person, even though it was written from a place of deep personal need. And that ambition is exactly where the real difficulty began. On paper, the song looks deceptively straightforward. The lyrics are clear. The message is direct. There's no cryptic storytelling or layered metaphors to hide behind. Freddie is asking one question over and over without decoration. Can anybody find me somebody to love? That simplicity was the problem. There was nowhere to hide. Every chord change had to support the emotion precisely. Every melodic shift had to feel inevitable. If anything sounded forced, the illusion collapsed. Brian later explained that the song didn't sit naturally under the fingers. The harmonic movement was unusual. The transitions demanded accuracy. Miss one detail, and the entire emotional arc felt wrong. Freddie would reject parts that sounded technically fine but emotionally empty. He kept refining, reshaping, stripping things back, then rebuilding them again. What made it exhausting was that the song refused shortcuts. You couldn't simplify it without killing it. You couldn't embellish it without cheapening it. It had to walk a perfect line between control and vulnerability, and that's one of the hardest balances to achieve in music. By the time the structure was locked in, everyone understood something quietly unsettling. This song was going to demand everything, and they hadn't even started on the vocals yet. What makes the song feel alive is also what nearly broke it. The voices. There was no choir waiting in the studio, no external singers brought in to create that gospel effect. Instead, Freddie decided to build it himself, layer by layer, voice by voice. He recorded harmony after harmony, sometimes stacking dozens of vocal takes to create the illusion of many people singing together. Brian and Roger added their voices too, but the core came from Freddie's relentless precision. Every line had to lock perfectly. If one harmony drifted slightly, the entire structure felt unstable. This wasn't about power, it was about discipline. Freddie wasn't just singing, he was engineering emotion. He knew exactly when the voices should sound united, when they should strain, and when they should pull back to expose vulnerability. The result sounds spontaneous. It isn't. It's carefully constructed chaos. Brian later admitted that listening back to the isolated vocal tracks was almost intimidating. You could hear how much work went into something that pretended to be effortless. And that's the cruel trick of the song. It never asked for admiration. It just asked to be believed. And that belief is what made everything else, especially performing it live, such a terrifying risk. Recording the song was only half the battle. Playing it live was something else entirely. On stage, there was no safety net, no endless vocal takes, no chance to rebalance harmonies later. Every note had to land in real time, and Somebody to Love gave almost no room for error. The song demands extreme vocal control from the very first line. Freddie had to shift between restraint and power without losing pitch, timing, or emotional intensity. At the same time, Brian and Roger were responsible for recreating the illusion of a choir with just a few voices and precise timing. One mistake didn't just sound wrong. It broke the spell. Brian later admitted that this was one of the songs that kept them on edge during live performances. Not because it was flashy, but because it was exposed. Every weakness could be heard. Every moment of fatigue became obvious. Freddie, however, never backed away from it. He leaned into the risk. Night after night, he delivered the song as if it were a conversation happening in real time, not a rehearsed performance. That tension, the possibility of failure, is what gave the live versions their electricity. The audience felt it, even if they didn't know why. And beneath the technical challenge was something even heavier, a truth Freddie was singing that grew more personal every time he stood at the microphone. For all its energy and lift, Somebody to Love is not a happy song. It's a confession. Freddie never wrapped the question in irony or distance. He asked it directly, almost desperately. And that honesty is what makes the song uncomfortable in the best possible way. He isn't searching for fame. He isn't searching for applause. He's searching for connection. That's what Brian eventually understood. The gospel structure doesn't celebrate certainty, it amplifies longing. The voices rise together, but the question remains unanswered. The music sounds communal, yet the feeling at its center is deeply solitary. Freddie sang it like someone who had everything and still felt the absence of something essential. That emotional exposure is what made the song so difficult to write. You can't fake vulnerability at this level. You either mean it or the song collapses. If this realization is hitting you right now, this is the moment to stay connected. Subscribe if you want more stories about the human truth behind legendary music. Like the video if this song feels different now. And tell me in the comments, does Somebody to Love feel uplifting to you or quietly heartbreaking? Because once you hear what Freddie was really asking for, you can't unhear it. Years later, Brian May looked back at Somebody to Love with a different kind of respect. Not nostalgia, recognition. He understood that the song hadn't aged because it was never tied to a moment. It wasn't chasing trends or technology. It was built on something far more durable, human need. That's why he called it a modern classic. The structure still holds. The emotion still lands. The question still matters. Brian has often pointed out that the song demands excellence without advertising it. It asks musicians to be precise, singers to be honest, and listeners to engage emotionally, all without drawing attention to the effort involved. That balance is rare. Most songs choose either complexity or accessibility. Somebody to Love somehow carries both, quietly and confidently. And that's what Freddie achieved. He wrote a song that sounds easy, feels universal, and yet remains almost impossible to replicate without losing its soul. Which raises a final, uncomfortable realization, one that explains why songs like this are almost never written anymore. Songs like Somebody to Love are rare today for a simple reason: they demand too much. They demand time, something modern music rarely allows. They demand patience in the studio, endless revisions, and an obsession with detail that doesn't fit neatly into current production cycles. But more than that, they demand risk. This song doesn't protect the writer. It doesn't hide emotion behind irony, trends, or digital perfection. It exposes need in its rawest form and asks the listener to sit with it. That kind of honesty is difficult to monetize quickly. It doesn't lend itself easily to formulas or shortcuts. Freddie wrote from a place that wasn't concerned with efficiency. He cared about impact, emotional impact, even if it made the process exhausting. Brian has often hinted that recreating something like this today would be nearly impossible. Not because musicians lack talent, but because the environment no longer encourages this level of emotional and technical commitment. Somebody to Love wasn't written to be consumed quickly. It was written to last. And that's exactly why it still feels alive decades later, while so many other songs fade as soon as their moment passes. Nothing about this song was accidental. Freddie Mercury understood the illusion. He was creating a song that feels spontaneous while being meticulously designed. He knew that if the effort showed, the emotion would weaken. So he hid the work. Every harmony was calculated. Every rise and fall of intensity was placed intentionally. Even the moments that feel slightly unsteady were meant to feel that way. Freddie wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing truth. That's why the song still resonates. The question at its center hasn't been answered, and Freddie never pretended it had been. Can anybody find me somebody to love? It's not resolved. It's not wrapped up. It's left hanging. That choice required confidence. It meant trusting the listener to sit with discomfort instead of offering easy closure. Brian recognized that bravery later. Not just musical bravery, emotional bravery. Freddie allowed himself to be seen without demanding anything in return. And that might be the hardest thing a songwriter can do. Somebody to Love sounds simple because it had to. The moment it feels complicated, it loses its power. The illusion of ease is what allows the emotion to pass through unfiltered. That's why Brian May called it a modern classic. Not because it's flawless, but because it's honest. Freddie Mercury created something that hides its labor so completely that most people never realize how much it costs to make it feel that way. The hardest songs don't announce their difficulty. They invite you in quietly. And they stay with you long after they end. This song does exactly that. And once you understand what it took to write it technically, emotionally, spiritually, you never hear it the same way again. What sounds effortless suddenly feels monumental. And that is Freddie Mercury's true genius.